From Resilient Partners, this is the Resilient Insights Podcast. Every episode offers in-depth insights on the key debates and conversations shaping Washington and the world. From policy to leadership to the lighter side of life, we're your source for thoughtful discussions. So get ready to be informed, inspired, and engaged. Welcome to the Resilient Insights Podcast. I'm your guide on this journey, Joshua Bacher, walking you through the intricate world of public policy, leadership, and the lighter side of life. On today's episode, I'm joined by North Carolina political operative Dee Stewart. Dee is here to walk us through the latest trends defining the presidential race in the state of North Carolina. Dee, welcome to the show.
Joshua, thank you. It's great to be with you.
Good to see you, my friend. It's been a while. Happy for you to be on the show and give us perspective about what's happening on the ground. You're out in North Carolina. What's the state of the race in the Tar Heel state?
I'm based in Raleigh, doing public affairs and political consulting for 23 years. Most notably, I've been the consultant for former Speaker pro tempore of the U.S. House, Patrick McHenry, for 20 years in Congress and 2 years prior in the state legislature, among other things. And I've run 200 or 300 races. I think politics has gotten a lot harder to predict. Folks I talk to in North Carolina and around the country say the same thing. This entire last era of the last 8 years or so that Donald Trump's come on the scene has really shaken things up. And North Carolina is we expect a pretty high turnout for early voting. And thus far, the Republicans are very pleased with the turnout for early voting relative to the Democrats in the Tar Heel state. I hear many more excited Republican activists and operatives in North Carolina than I do in other states in the country right now, where Republicans might be doing well, or they might be doing a little, not as well in some states, but they seem to be overperforming in North Carolina as compared to the Democrats. And of course, North Carolina is a huge unaffiliated voter population, and a lot of it will come down to how they vote. But the Republicans, as of the beginning of this week, were ahead of the Democrats by 325,000 early votes cast, which is, again, unprecedented. And of course, it reflects the dynamics of the race and the fact this is the first election where the entire party has pushed for voters to vote early. And so in North Carolina, I think the Republicans have been pleasantly surprised thus far as it relates to the turnout modeling. You look at the polling, all the different polls that are out, it's a little more of a mixed bag. It looks a little closer, but in terms of turnout, a lot of the Democratic key constituencies are underperforming thus far, and a lot of the Republican key constituencies seem to be overperforming.
You look at the polls, as you mentioned, 538's aggregate of polls has Donald Trump up by 1 point. Who has the momentum on the ground right now? Republicans?
The Republicans, I'm more optimistic about North Carolina now than 2 weeks ago, based on the early vote. I think that, obviously the Republican ticket has a gubernatorial candidate who is underperforming the rest of the ticket, Mark Robinson, current lieutenant governor. And the Democrats have Attorney General Josh Stein, who's widely expected to win that race. That being said, there are lots of other very competitive races. We're having a blue moon election cycle in North Carolina in 2024. We have no U.S. Senate race on the ballot. Senator Budd was elected 2 years ago. Senator Tillis will be seeking re-election 2 years from now. So in 2024, we don't have a Senate race. So we have the presidential. Again, I think that just looking at the trends of early voting, we're very encouraged that Trump is going to carry the state anywhere between by 2 points to 6 points. Trump carried the state in 2016 by about 4 points. He carried it in 2020 by about 1 point. I would look for him to overperform where he was in 2020. We have the governor's race where the Democrat is the heavy favorite, but we have a lieutenant governor's race for an open seat. We have an attorney general's race for an open seat. And we have a treasurer's race with an open seat, and then several other races. Auditor's race is effectively an open seat. We have a whole bunch of other races that are very competitive all the way down the ballot. Probably most notably, we have a judicial race for the Supreme Court, whereas the Republican wins, then the Republicans will control a majority on the North Carolina Supreme Court through the 2030 census and the 2031 reapportionment for redistricting. North Carolina is a purple state. It's fairly competitive statewide, but because Republicans have controlled redistricting for the past couple of redistricting cycles, they've been able to keep a supermajority in the legislature in both chambers. And that's one of the things we're going to be looking at here on the ground. So again, what we're going to be looking at not only at the presidential level, but we're going to be looking at the council of state races from lieutenant governor all the way down the ballot. How many of those do the Republicans win? It's roughly split about evenly in terms of which party controls which office statewide. And then do we carry the race for the North Carolina Supreme Court, which again, if happens, then gives the Republicans a decided advantage on that court, which is key to batting down any excessive or improper redistricting cases brought to overturn a map. And then also what happens as it relates to the congressional race. We have one really competitive race out of the 14 seats we have. Don Davis, Democrat incumbent, represents Eastern North Carolina. He's being challenged by a Republican, a retired Colonel Laurie Buckout, a veteran and a first-time candidate, I believe. So we're going to be looking all the way up and down the ballot to see how this election goes. I feel great about Trump winning North Carolina. I feel sort of uneasy about what the national result will be. I think that it could go either way. Polling indicates a neck and neck race nationally and in the battleground states. Certainly Trump was successful in winning a narrow race in 2016. Perhaps he'll do it again.
You look at the history of the races in North Carolina, Democrats have not carried North Carolina since 2008 when Barack Obama carried that. How and why did North Carolina become a battleground state? Has it been population growth? Has it been other trends that the average person may not know about?
North Carolina is a growing state. Every 10 years, the state adds about 1 million people to its
Wow.
population net. And a huge percentage of those new registrants are moving into Wake County, which is the state's largest county. That's where Raleigh is. And Mecklenburg County, which is the state's second largest county. And that's where Charlotte is. Unlike the west coast of Florida, which is drawing a lot of Midwesterners, we tend to draw a lot of folks from the Northeast. We tend to draw a lot of New Yorkers, a lot of folks from New Jersey, a lot of folks from Massachusetts, and also a good number from California, Florida, and other places. The state over a 30-year period became more Republican and simultaneously, in some respects, less conservative. I would say now the state has become more Republican than Democrat, but the group that really dominates the state's politics is leaderless and has no party platform, and that's the unaffiliated voters. By 2026, where Tom Tillis will be running among an electorate that's roughly about 30% Republican, 30% Democrat, and about 40% unaffiliated. So whereas the swing vote back in the 70s and 80s, when Senator Jesse Helms was in office as a Democrat turned Republican candidate, the swing vote used to be Eastern North Carolina Democrats. Now the swing vote essentially is upwardly mobile, highly educated voters down the I-85 corridor. And that starts around Raleigh area, the Triangle, Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill. It goes all the way down through Greensboro, past Charlotte, all the way down to the state line. About 2/3 of the state's population reside in 15 counties out of 100. And those counties essentially are all contiguous, running from the Triangle all the way down to the South Carolina border below Charlotte through Gaston County. By and large, upwardly mobile voters, registered unaffiliateds, and it's by and large people who are not from North Carolina originally. I live in Wake County, Raleigh. Between 6 and 7 out of 10 citizens of Wake County are not originally from North Carolina. It's akin to places like Phoenix, Austin, Texas, and other places where you just have a tremendous number of upwardly mobile, highly educated people who move in disproportionately from the Northeast.
You talk about the unaffiliated voters. What are both candidates doing to appeal to those voters? What issues are animating the race when it comes to attracting those unaffiliated voters today?
Well, I think this is really the challenge of both parties as it relates to North Carolina in the next not only 5 days, but in the next decade. It's which party is going to come to the middle and offer real solutions to unaffiliated voters. Unaffiliated voters are less ideological and more about problem solving. In terms of the Republican approach, they're saying, look, voters ought to have more choice as it relates to education choices. Voters ought to be able to afford more things at the grocery store. We ought to have a more predictable international situation so that more young people might want to go into the military and have more certainty about the United States' role in the world. And we need to control crime. And one of the ways that you control crime is that you have a predictable and functioning southern border with an immigration policy that makes sense. Those are some of the Republican arguments. I think some of the Democratic arguments include, that Vice President Harris believes that she's going to create an economy through various programs that make it easier to start a small business. She says Democrats tout their support from teachers unions and their record on education. I've heard her saying that she's not going to go back and allow insurance companies to deny people with pre-existing conditions. Those are things that are on the minds of unaffiliated voters. Now, I'm not saying I agree necessarily with what she's saying or that what she's saying is rooted in fact. And I think that there are a lot of Democrats who would not agree with everything President Trump is saying as it relates to the issues I mentioned that the Republicans are coming to the table with. But both parties understand that you have to have a certain percentage of those unaffiliated voters if you want to carry the state. We've had close presidential races here for a long time. It's always been a state that's kind of gone back and forth, back and forth.
The national media largely focuses on the big rallies and Trump making the visits and Vance making the visits and Vice President Harris and Governor Walz making visits. Are there anything that they're doing unconventional on the ground to turn out voters today?
First of all, I have to offer a correction. Bob Dole carried the state by 4 points in 1996. I was erroneous in my enthusiasm to prove the point that the state is competitive, and it does surprise people how competitive the state is.
What are they doing on the ground? When you turn on the news, you watch CNN, Fox News, all the coverage is about the big rallies. Are they doing anything unconventional on the ground to turn out voters today?
They're knocking on doors and they're dropping a ton of mail. I get mail pieces. I've already voted, but I'm still getting at least a couple of pieces of mail. And like a lot of other folks, I've somehow ended up with on the text list for both campaigns, and I'm getting texts
I'm ready for them to stop.
yeah, all the time. So I think that there's only so many things you can do to actually turn out voters. You can knock on their door, you can
Yep.
send them a piece of mail, you can call them, or you can send them a
You can
text
text them.
message. That's pretty much it. But I think that Vice President Harris has done a great job, I think, among the Rust Belt states of setting up a get out the vote operation that is fairly robust. I think that a lot of the Republican special interest groups and Republican partner groups have done a great job setting up a get out the vote effort in the Rust Belt states for President Trump. I just think that among the Sun Belt states, I think Trump has, just in watching the polls and in watching the level of enthusiasm at these rallies for both candidates, I think Trump has an advantage in Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, and most particularly North Carolina. I think that the real battle is going to be, can Trump pick off one or more of the Rust Belt states of Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan? That's going to really be, in my opinion, what this election is going to come down to. And so it's going to come down to, um, who gets their vote out, and it's also still going to come down to, who can you persuade? I do think there are still some persuadable voters out there that haven't decided there is kind of a stark difference between the two candidates for president. And I think that they're still working through in their mind what is their priority. Is their priority the economy? Is it a social issue? Is it the border? Is it education? And what's going to be the determining factor in their vote? So I still think that there are those undecided voters as well. But I think that again, it's both. It's always both. If history is a guide, I think Trump has a great chance to be elected president because people tend to vote their pocketbook issues. And all the polling shows that people don't believe that the economy is as good as it was 3 years into the Trump presidency when the COVID crisis began. And whether or not the economy is better or not, it's all about the way people feel. And I think that they don't feel like that they have as much purchasing power and as much economic freedom.
Let's talk a little bit about the governor's race. You mentioned it earlier. What's the state of that race right now? There's been a lot of national coverage around the lieutenant governor who's running for the governorship, and some colorful comments that he's made or not made. How's that playing out on the ground right now?
Well, I actually think that the lieutenant governor's actually bounced back a little bit because I think he was literally so far down in the polls he couldn't go any lower.
Okay.
So I think but more than anything, I think that's just a function of folks are really looking at the presidential race more than anything else. And he's probably benefiting from some Republicans who are just like, oh, okay, I'll throw him a vote in the box, even though perhaps they're not as enthusiastic about voting for him. I will say this: I think that Attorney General Josh Stein, the Democrat nominee, is likely to win the race, and I think that he is getting more Republican crossover votes than any other candidate this cycle for a statewide race, and probably any other candidate in the last 20 or 30 years for a statewide race. There are high negatives as it relates to Lieutenant Governor Robinson. He won the election for the nomination through a primary process. He had a lot of support at the grassroots level, but some of the comments that he has made, they might work in other states. There may be some states where they would work a little better toward the general electorate, but North Carolina is uh, a state that has the Charlotte metropolitan area. It has the Triad metropolitan area and it has the Triangle metropolitan area. And, the one thing you have to do as a candidate is you have to be inclusive. And he's made some very exclusionary comments that have made him less competitive than he would have been otherwise. There are folks who don't like him, who don't like his style. There are folks who do like his style. But one thing is for sure, if Lieutenant Governor Robinson had been more inclusive in his comments, he would be doing better than he's doing today. That being said, again, we have a lot of ticket splitting in North Carolina generally. Uh, I mentioned that the statewide offices are roughly held in equal number by the two parties. And so, currently, just for an example, we have a Democratic governor, we have a Republican lieutenant governor, we have a Democratic attorney general, we have a Republican treasurer, we have a Democratic secretary of state, we have a Democratic auditor. I mean, it goes on and on and on. So
Wow.
I think that what you'll have is you'll have folks that may vote one way on the presidential, may vote a different way on the governor's race, and then they'll just take each of those races with whatever information they have, and they'll cast their vote for who they think the best candidate is. It could be that if Stein defeats Robinson by a wide margin, that it would hurt the chances of some Republicans running statewide. But I tend to think that that will be a very limited impact. I tend to think that the voters are going to take the candidates on their own merit, each one for each office, as they've tended to do. Again, reflecting a state of a lot of voters who are not from North Carolina, who may not even be from this region, and who are registered unaffiliated disproportionately. And, North Carolina is the ninth most populous state in the country and growing. And it's due to the fact that there just are a lot of folks who come here who have an idea that they want to vote for a problem solver, and they don't care which party that person is a member of.
Does Josh Stein have enough political capital to bring Kamala Harris over the finish line, or is there just too much ticket splitting for that to be the case?
Well, I think that there's a couple things working against that. First off, the presidential race is the first race at the top of the ticket. So
Yeah.
before you even, I've already voted and I've looked at the ballot. And so you're not even thinking about governor yet. You're looking at president. That's the first thing you're thinking about.
Ooh, yeah.
So no, I don't think that. I don't think that he will be able to pull her across. I do think that Trump is going to win the state. I think that most of the polling shows that he's ahead. And again, with the early voting numbers that we're seeing thus far, we're encouraged that he's probably going to remain ahead and is going to win this election, as he's done the past two times he's run in North Carolina. So, so the answer to that, I think, is no. Would Stein maybe have some coattails for some of the other folks below him on the ballot? I think that's really what the question would be.
Yeah.
Let's look at it logically. Again, Stein is he's going to win almost all the Democrat votes. Robinson is going to win the overwhelming majority of the Republicans' votes, but Stein's going to win more Republican votes than maybe anyone else has in recent memory. And then the unaffiliated votes are going to be what really counts for all of these statewide races. Right now, I can tell you that all the Republican operatives, based on the early voting numbers, are very bullish on Republicans' chances of winning these statewide offices. We'll just have to wait and see.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get involved in politics?
I was watching the swearing in of President Reagan on January the 20th of 1981 in a second grade classroom in which I was a student. And it was the same day that the Iranian hostages were being released back to the United States after 444 days in captivity. And I was just enthralled with everything I saw on the split screen of the television as a young child. And so I started getting involved in student government and running for offices all the way through school. I was elected state chairman of the North Carolina Federation of College Republicans. I chaired the statewide CRs for 2 years. And then I've had the chance to work for some great elected leaders on the Republican side over the last 2.5 decades professionally, including Congressman McHenry, including Richard Hudson, who's now a member of Congress from North Carolina and chairs the NRCC, the National Republican Congressional Committee. Was able to run Richard's primary runoff and general election upon his first foray into elective politics in 2012, and have just had a great opportunity to work with a lot of great people over that
That's
period of
awesome.
time. Along the way, I served as executive director of the Republican Party of Iowa from 1999 to 2001. During the 2000 presidential cycle, we put on the largest Iowa straw poll that ever was. It set a record for population at a paid political fundraiser in the United States. Really enjoyed that. Put on the Iowa caucuses as executive director. Started my business in Raleigh, the Stewart Group, in 2001. And again, have run 200 or 300 political campaigns, won about 80% of them, served as Congressman McHenry's first chief of staff, and have a great staff that I work with who've been with our company for a long time, and just really enjoy all things political. Enjoy reading about it, enjoy attending the conventions, and just enjoy all the good work that I'm able to engage in with a lot of my consulting colleagues here in North Carolina and around the country.
What advice do you have for young people looking to get into politics?
Get out of your house and go do something.
Yeah.
Don't sit around sending emails and texting people and sending Instagram messages and expect that that's going to get you a job or going to get you engaged in the political process. Leave your house, leave your apartment, get out and go meet people and do things and get involved. And when there's an opportunity to get involved, and you're on the fence, go do it. Uh, that's number one. Number two, always uh, act ethically as it relates to the profession that you're in. Shortcuts are not the way to go. They end up in big problems, and you have to keep your nose clean, so to speak, if you want to work in politics over a long period of time. And the best way to do that is to make good decisions about right and wrong, and telling the truth, and treating people the way you'd want to be treated if the shoe were on the other foot. And finally, I would just say, just work very, very hard. It's working your way up through the political business and the public affairs business is difficult. It's not easy. To be successful, you have to be willing to put in the time and the effort and the energy and, frankly, the money at various points along the way in order to build a political base and a base for the public affairs business, and develop a reputation as someone who's effective and knows how to get things done. And the only way you're able to do that in politics, look, it's a people business. The only way you're going to form relationships with people is to go out and meet people and engage in the process hand to hand, face to face, and be there when things are happening, be there when events are taking place, have conversations and form relationships. And when those relationships, they end up paying off in the long run.
Yeah, great insights, great advice. We do something fun on the podcast here is we curate a playlist of music that captures the mood of the election. What's your song you would add to the playlist that adds context to the current election cycle?
Oh, I think probably the Pointer Sisters. I'm so excited and I just can't hide it. Who's who's not excited? This is like the World Series of politics.
It is.
So we're all so excited. We all can't hide it. We all want our candidate to win. So this is what we live for. And we'll all be up on Tuesday night, November 5th, watching the results with bated breath. And, I would also say that I think one of the things I've learned over my 3 decades in politics is to just take the victories and the losses with equal acceptance. We live in a great country. We have a great constitution. Those of us who live in North Carolina live in a great state. Our nation is comprised of 50 great states and territories. And no matter who wins the presidency and no matter who controls the Congress, we're going to wake up in this same great country. And the country and the Constitution have proven to be unbreakable and proven to be sort of a guidepost for the rest of the world as it relates to how to generate economic opportunities and freedom for our nation's people and for people of other parts of the world who choose to follow in the path of freedom and constitutional republic. So that being said, I look forward to the election results, and I really, really want to win. But that being said, I'll accept the results, whatever they are, and with a lot of gratitude for the opportunity to live in a country where we get to vote, we get to express ourselves.
I think these jobs and work you do in politics and public affairs is a lot more fun than a lot of people realize. And I agree with everything you've said there. So again, great insights. Where can people find you online? Where's the Stewart Group online?
You just said it. www.stewartgrouponline.com. And that's STEWART. StewartGroupOnline.com.
Awesome. Thank you for the insights today, Dee. Thank you to all our listeners for taking a moment to listen. A couple of quick plugs to all listeners and viewers. Be sure to give us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast. This podcast is available on all streaming platforms at Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, or anywhere else you get your podcast. It's also available on YouTube. So be sure to give us a watch there and a review as well. Dee, until next time, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Joshua. All the best.
Take care.
Beacon I can hear but can't see, so I know where to go. I find the answers to the questions in my life from the music in my head.